Hello and welcome to 5.13, Reducing Urban Runoff. Now we have spoke a little bit about runoff earlier and ways to prevent it, so let's see how we can reduce it further. So we're going to talk about ways of mitigating the problems and some methods on how to increase what is known as water infiltration, meaning water that goes into the ground, not off. And we're going to talk about permeable pavement again. It's expensive, but it works. How planting trees is good. And building up, not out. That's something you may not know about, but we'll talk about it. And again, mitigate means to reduce, in case you did not know that word. So let's see. What are some environmental consequences of this urban runoff? Well, if the water runs off, that means it does not infiltrate. And if it does not infiltrate, it cannot get back into the ground. Now, running off into the ocean is great, and it's going to possibly evaporate and turn into clouds and rain. But the key is getting it back into the ground. And if it doesn't do this, groundwater supplies are going to be in bad shape. So you can see here, that's bad. Rain washes pollution also from the streets into these things called storm drains, which could eventually bring that water back into local waterways. And if you look at those grates in the street, sometimes they'll be labeled with, this enters a active waterway or something. So, always be careful with what goes down that drain. So pollution and its effects, salt from the roads when we put it on there to prevent icing, that can get into the ground and cause plant and insect death. And once again, here's that grate I was telling you about. So all the water goes into that, goes into what's called a storm drain, and eventually makes its way back into a larger body of water. Sediment, turbidity, if dirt ends up washing in there, that could cause waterways to get clogged up. Boats will also hit the bottom if it's too shallow. Fertilizer, eutrophication, we know all about that. And pesticides. Pesticides wash down the drain. They may begin to kill non-target species. And again, that's bad, messing up the whole entire food web/food chain. And oil and gasoline, when that gets in there, that can sit on the top of the water. It can suffocate fish and kill aquatic insects. Again, messing up the food webs and food chains of the local waterways. So, a couple of solutions. One is called permeable pavement, and we spoke a little bit about it earlier. But this is designed to allow water to get in. Now, some will run off, of course. Some will. So I don't want you to think that it's perfect. But a lot can get in and ultimately get collected. And that's the key. So if you can decrease the runoff, that means you're going to decrease pollutants and other pesticides and herbicides and all this other stuff from washing into our local waterways. And it can get into the ground. And again, the ground is a giant filter. And the dirt will filter all of those bad things out before it gets to the water or the groundwater. And it will also decrease the likelihood of flooding. Because if you have all this urban cement and it rains like crazy, water has to go somewhere and it could flood, especially things like the subways. Unfortunately, it does cost a couple extra bucks, but in the long run, it could be worth it. Something called a rain garden. These have also popped up in a lot of urban areas, and basically they are a nice little garden, maybe planted in the middle of a parking lot. And it is just a way to catch some of the water. And once again, if there's dirt underneath it, the dirt will act like a natural filter. So it will decrease the runoff and increase infiltration. And it will decrease the likelihood of flooding during a heavy rain. Here's one just kind of on the sidewalk. And again, you can see there's a pretty serious amount of stuff underneath it. It's not just dirt. So there's a lot going on underneath there. And it also creates a habitat for bugs and things like pollinators to help further the pollination of plants, things like bees. Public transit. If you can take a bus or a train, this many people can fit on that bus, clearing up all of that street from traffic, and also a lot less pollution. Riding a bike can also save all that pollution. If you take a car, that is traffic and pollution and more need for roads. More motor oil, more tire pieces, gasoline, antifreeze, and that leaks out of your radiator. All of these things can cause pollution and harm to the ecosystem. Again, more cars, more lanes, more parking lots, more impervious surfaces, more runoff. Public transit will help you decrease all of that, hopefully decrease pollution and also lower CO2 emissions, because instead of every single car burning fossil fuels, it's just one vehicle. And this is, again, a pretty interesting kind of graphic there. So if all the people get on the bus, then there's a lot less traffic on the streets. Another one a lot of people don't think about is building up, not out. So for example, if you have a large city that takes up this much area, or homes or whatever, or you can build up. Up has such a smaller footprint. So you can see here that this is a very large area. Here, it's a very small area. That leaves all of this to be, undeveloped, or less roads, less parking lots, things like that. And that is Atlanta versus Barcelona. And they're about the same population, plus or minus. And you can see that urban area is way, way, way less, because building up is better than building out. And also less need for cars, less carbon emissions. You can also combine this with what are called green rooftops. Now, this is extremely expensive, and it is extremely cutting edge, if you will. But you can see here there are tiered green areas within a building. So that's going to help reduce runoff. And also, all of those plants will help sequester that CO2, which we talked about, and ultimately help filter out the air from things like NO2, particulate matter, and other harmful asthma-causing pollutants. So again, a quick hit. This is something that they could ask you to do moving forward, and it would be to design your own investigation. So you could look at the relationship between the number of trees and the amount of stormwater runoff, and you could do a hypothesis, a procedure, and your independent and dependent variables. So great practice. So hopefully that was helpful, and I'll see you soon.